Something unsettling lingered beneath the flowers on Bellini's coffin. Something that smelled less like grief and more like guilt. In the world of orchids and obituaries, one whisper from a Manhattan tunnel was enough to unravel a life built on secrets. What begins with a dead florist and a woman in mourning soon twists into a question more chilling than murder itself. What if the most dangerous lie is the one you live? Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. Let me know in the comments. Let's begin the story. You'd think that after 5 years of working under the same roof as Nero Wolfe, I'd stop being surprised by anything short of spontaneous combustion in the orchid rooms. But that morning, just after 11, the hour when Wolfe typically forbids all human interaction except with orchids and me, the doorbell rang, and I opened it to find what looked like a florist's catalogue come to life. She was holding a box, wore an expression like she'd just lost a dog, and had eyes the colour of violets after rain. Before I could get out my standard, "Mr. Wolfe doesn't buy flowers, he raises them," she gave me a half curtsy and said, "It's about the order he placed last week." That line earned her an express pass to the front room. Now, I knew Wolfe hadn't ordered a thing. The man thinks commercial florists are glorified butchers. Still, I wasn't about to turn her away before coffee, not when she smelled like lilacs and had a voice you'd expect to hear reading poetry in a tea room. I told her to wait, went to the plant rooms, and braced myself to interrupt Wolfe mid-misting. I might as well have fired a starter pistol. Wolfe stood under the misting grid like a man receiving last rites, except with more reverence. The orchid he was studying looked no more thrilled to see me than he was. "Yes," he intoned without turning. "I've got a problem," I said. "You've apparently developed a habit of ordering flowers from strangers. A woman's in the front room with a box. Says you requested a hybrid. Name's Camille Yarrow." Wolfe turned, glowered and sighed. "Pfui, I have done no accepting anonymous horticulture. Nor do I indulge in hybrids whose lineage is as questionable as their delivery method." Miss Yarrow didn't flinch. Instead, she blinked twice, then sat down stiffly, like her knees had run out of courage. "I didn't send it," she whispered. "It came to my shop. Petal and stem." The sender didn't leave a name, only this. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, folded slip of paper. Her hand shook as she handed it to me. Wolfe waved it off like it might contain pollen. The note was typed, just 6 words. "Sorry for what's coming. A friend." Wolfe made a low noise, somewhere between a grunt and a growl. "Nonsense." Insipid melodrama, Camille's voice cracked. "I didn't know where else to go. My business partner and I, something's not right." This felt pointed. Wolfe turned to the orchid again, as if it had betrayed him personally. "If you came seeking comfort," he said, "you should try a priest. I am neither a therapist nor an oracle." She looked at me. I gave her my best non-committal shrug, the kind that means, yeah, he's always like this. Miss Yarrow left 5 minutes later, escorted to the door by yours truly, her eyes damp and her dignity mostly intact. Wolfe had returned to his orchids with the enthusiasm of a man filing tax returns in Braille. "She was rattled," I said as I came back in. "The note's real, the flower's real, and I bet my Wednesday poker money she's not faking the fear." "She is irrelevant," Wolfe said flatly. "This intrusion was theatrical, not substantive. Someone has made her a pawn. I will not be drawn in." I picked up the slip of paper from the table where he'd left it face down and slipped it into my jacket. "Suit yourself," I said, "but if someone's setting up a game, they've got your name on the scoreboard." Wolfe muttered something in Latin, probably a curse, and waved me away. I went to my desk, spun my chair twice, and started thinking about anonymous flowers, notes without signatures, and a woman with grief in her voice. That evening, while Wolfe sipped his beer and Fritz prepared something with duck fat and moral superiority, I opened the Gazette and nearly dropped my fork. The headline wasn't flashy. They never are when the body's already cold and the drama's upscale. But halfway down page 3, wedged between a mayoral quote and a society divorce, was a piece titled, "Funeral Florist Found Dead Among Own Arrangements." It was Aldous Green, partner at Petal and Stem, found in the back room of the shop, laid out flat on a marble slab surrounded by funeral lilies. His own handiwork, apparently. Neighbours had smelled something off. The police were still playing the suicide card, pending autopsy. Wolfe noticed my expression and raised a brow. "Something unpleasant?" I handed him the article without comment. He read it in silence, then folded the paper and reached for his beer. "Coincidence," he said. "Camille Yarrow is not my client." "No," I replied, "but she walked into our house this morning with a box, a note, and a story." "And left with none of the above." I tapped the folded paper. "Now she's missing a business partner too." Wolfe reached for his beer again, but didn't drink. That was the first sign. The next morning, Wolfe avoided the subject like it owed him money. He spent 3 hours pruning orchids with the concentration of a monk and ignored the phone ringing 3 times before I picked it up myself. Camille didn't call. No one did. By noon, I was pacing in front of the globe by the windows, tossing the crumpled note in the air like a bad coin. "She said it came with the flower," I mused aloud. "You believe her?" Wolfe didn't glance up. "I believe gravity. But it landed on our doorstep. Which means someone wanted you, not the NYPD, not a friend, you, to get the first sniff of whatever's going on." He grunted. I said, "Crime column." Fritz, polishing a copper saucepan in the kitchen, lifted an eyebrow but made no move toward the bell. So I went, and there she was, Miss Camille Yarrow. Same violet eyes, same perfume with top notes of panic. But this time dressed in a black ensemble that could have made a funeral director weep with envy. Mourning chic. Gloves, hat, veil, the whole catalogue. "I'm sorry to bother you again," she said, voice lower than a whisper. "But I didn't know where else to go." "You've come to the wrong place," I said, stepping aside. She walked in like the walls might close around her if she moved too quickly. This wasn't just a courtesy call. Not with eyes that red and hands that stiff. Wolfe would not be pleased, but I was already halfway to not caring. Something told me we were going to have company for breakfast, of the business variety. Wolfe, when informed, took 3 full seconds of silence before issuing his response. "Bring her in," he sighed, "but only if she has refrained from carrying any more flora." Camille sat gingerly on the edge of the red armchair, as if it might eject her for grieving too hard. I gave her a glass of water and my most unthreatening expression. "Our shop," she began. "Petal and Stem. We specialize in funerals. Not just any. Private, luxury farewells. Wealthy families, celebrities, diplomats. We do their last flowers." Wolfe nodded once. Not quite approval, more like acknowledgement of a decent wine vintage. "Lately, Aldous, my partner, and I, We started getting strange calls. Anonymous. No direct threats, just whispers. Questions. Then the orchid and the note. Wolfe steepled his fingers and regarded her as he might a wasp in a bell jar. "You are not here about an arrangement," he said. "No," she murmured. "I'm here because someone is arranging me next." That got a twitch out of Wolfe's left eyebrow. Just a flicker, but for him that's practically gasping. "When I saw the paper," she said, "I couldn't believe it. They said Aldous overdosed, sleeping pills, but he hated medicine, wouldn't even take aspirin." "Then perhaps," Wolfe said dryly, "he overcame his distaste in favor of oblivion." She didn't flinch, but her voice dropped an octave. "No, you don't understand. He had plans, a new partnership, expansion into private rituals. He wasn't depressed. He was excited." I glanced at Wolfe. He did not blink. "Also," she added, twisting the corner of her glove, "Aldous knew things. Things about our clients. There are people who wouldn't want that information. Liberated." "Be precise," Wolfe said. She gave a small nod. "He kept a ledger. Names, payments, notes. I told him to destroy it, but he wouldn't. And now he is dead." "Yes. And the ledger? Missing." I gave Wolfe a look that said, "Told you it wasn't just a flower delivery." He ignored me. "You're suggesting someone silenced Mr. Green," Wolfe said, "to protect themselves from embarrassment." "I think," she said slowly, "he tried to blackmail someone and lost." That made Wolfe's other eyebrow join the first. If both were up, the case was halfway through the front door. But instead of leaning in, Wolfe leaned back. His fingers resumed their little pyramid of intellectual detachment. "You are not my client, Miss Yarrow." Camille's breath caught. "I cannot engage in speculative morality, especially when rooted in commerce and hearsay. I investigate facts, and I see none here." Camille rose to her feet, stiff but still composed. "Then you won't help me?" Wolfe waved a hand as if brushing away invisible pollen. "No, I will not." Her face didn't crumble, but the crack showed. I walked her to the door without a word, and she thanked me with a smile that had too much weight in it. Wolfe from his chair muttered something about emotional subterfuge and fraudulent grief. I didn't reply, because even if Wolfe didn't see facts yet, I'd seen fear, real, immediate, and dressed in black. And I've learned something over the years. When someone walks into the brownstone afraid, they usually have good reason. She didn't get far. 2 steps down the stoop and I caught up with her. Someone had replaced the sky with grey silk. Something about her story didn't add up. And it wasn't just grief or orchids. Whatever was buried with Aldous Green. It wasn't just his body. Before stepping into her town car, she paused. "There's one more thing," she said. "I wasn't going to mention it, but..." She hesitated. I waited. "A few weeks ago," she whispered, "Aldous came back from a meeting furious. Said someone had backed out on a deal. Someone bigger than the funerals. He didn't say who, but he called them dangerous." "Dangerous how?" I asked. "He didn't say, just that if they came back, he'd make sure they regretted it." She glanced up at the brownstone. "I think he kept files, not just client orders. Leverage." "Still missing?" She nodded. "But I don't think whoever took them did it for curiosity's sake." That was enough to make me reach for my pen. Mentally, I didn't take notes in front of widows, even the not-quite-widow type. She stepped into the car. The driver pulled away. Back inside, Wolfe was mid-bite on a slice of buttered pumpernickel and reading the New Republic. I said nothing. He didn't ask. But the next time I looked, the orchid was gone from the front room. And Wolfe, for once, was not entirely uninterested. The sign on the glass read "Petal and Stem, Elegance in Farewell." It had that refined, overcompensating feel you get when a business charges 3 figures for a bouquet that smells like nostalgia and upper-class denial. Inside, the air was a mix of lilies, eucalyptus, and just a whisper of panic. The counter was manned, loosely, by a kid who looked like he'd been promoted from bicycle messenger to junior embalmer by mistake. He was lean, twitchy, and had the kind of complexion you only get from equal parts adrenaline and poor lighting. "I'm looking for Miss Yarrow," I said. She's prepping the casket lilies." He offered his hand like it might explode. Freddie Link." I shook it. It felt like a handshake from a cold ferret. I said, "Relax, Freddie. I'm not here to audit you." "Oh, okay. You with the cops?" "Worse," I told him. "Private inquiry." He blinked like that was a category he didn't study for. And somewhere in the back, I heard Camille's voice calling my name, with the tone of someone who wanted backup and a fire extinguisher. Camille emerged from the cooler, holding a clipboard and looking like she'd slept in 3-minute intervals. Behind her trailed a man whose face was carved from granite and whose suit smelled like mothballs and cigars. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "this is Otto Bellini," one of our regular clients. Bellini didn't offer a hand. He just gave me the kind of up-down appraisal you reserve for salesmen and insurance adjusters. "Funerals don't schedule themselves," he grunted, "and I don't like interruptions." "Don't worry," I said. "I don't interrupt. I just rearrange the tempo." He didn't laugh. I didn't expect him to. "I don't like strangers poking around," he added, narrowing his eyes. "Well," I replied, "then you'll hate what I do for a living." He muttered something about amateurs and brushed past me like I was a stray floral arrangement. Camille watched him leave with a tension that hadn't been there yesterday. "Otto," she said softly, "doesn't believe in coincidences." Neither did I, especially when someone's arranging people like flower vases. We'd barely made it to the back office when Freddie trotted in like a deer hearing bagpipes. "Miss Yarrow?" "Something just came in from the van. No card." Camille frowned. "What is it?" "Big wreath." Bigger than usual. We followed him out front. Sitting on the work table was a funeral wreath large enough to double as a tree swing. White lilies, black satin ribbon, and an expensive scent that didn't come out of any florist's fridge. But the kicker was the ribbon. Camille read it out loud. "Rest easy, Alden Green." I said, "They couldn't even get his name right." She stared at it like it might whisper something if she listened long enough. "There's no sender?" I asked Freddie. He shook his head. "No card." "In the van." I said, "Relax, champ. You're not under oath. Yet." His face crumpled into something close to tears, and he bolted toward the back. Camille sat on a stool and folded her arms tight. "He's just a kid," she said. "Aldous hired him because he used to deliver for a competitor. Said he was quick and cheap." I asked, "Would he lie for you?" "No," she said. "He can barely lie to himself." I circled the wreath again, then asked, "You recognize the style?" "No, that's not ours. It's wrong. Messy. Off balance. Mockery, maybe?" She nodded slowly. "Or a message. Yeah, and it was written in flowers, not ink." We were past hints and into warnings now. After Freddie vanished into the storeroom and Camille retreated to reorganize her nerves, I decided to nose around, politely, which meant I asked a few questions while pretending not to pry, and poked through the client binder like I was just curious about font choices. Most of the entries were routine. Society names, church accounts, politicians who liked lilies with their legacies. But a few names weren't public figures. They were private ones. Names I recognized from page 6 scandals and whispered indictments. Aldous Green, apparently, had cultivated more than orchids. He'd been doing side gigs, private arrangements, not advertised, not billed through the shop, and definitely not taxed. And these weren't for Grandma's farewell. Mob wives, PR teams, the kind of people who wanted funerals fast, quiet, and expensive. Camille re-entered, calmer now. I gave her the binder. She didn't flinch. I told him to stop, she said, but he said they paid cash, and it kept the doors open. And if you make flowers for people with secrets, I said, those secrets tend to rub off. She nodded. That's what I'm afraid of. She should have been, because that wasn't fear in the shop anymore. It was foreboding. I left the shop around 6, with the wreath still looming and Freddie still sulking in the back room like a ghost with a guilty conscience. I promised Camille I'd check in the next day, and gave her my number again, in case she needed to panic on speed dial. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was elbow deep in pâté and Pascal. Fritz had decided soup was passé, so we were eating lentils like we'd offended France. Wolfe didn't ask about my day. He rarely did. But when I mentioned the wreath, anonymous, expensive, and misspelled, his fork paused. For the deceased, he inquired, allegedly, and spelled incorrectly. Yup. He nodded once. Clumsy intimidation is still intimidation. That was the most he'd given me since the orchid showed up. I took it as a win. I went upstairs early to sort notes, but sleep wasn't in the cards. Around midnight, the phone rang. Camille's voice was thin and frayed. Archie, someone broke the front window. Anyone hurt? No, number, but there's something inside. I was already pulling on shoes. By the time I got there, the police were taping off the sidewalk, and Camille was huddled in the corner, like a vase cracked clean down the middle. Inside the shop, just past the shattered glass, lay a single white rose. Only it wasn't white anymore. Someone had soaked it in deep, deliberate red. Not blood, but close enough in colour and cruelty. I didn't need Wolfe's vocabulary to name what that meant. That flower wasn't a message. It was a countdown. The next morning started like most at the brownstone. Eggs, coffee, and silence. All seasoned with Wolfe's disdain for humanity, before noon. Then the phone rang. Not our line, Wolfe's private one. He didn't touch it. He never does. I picked up. This Goodwin. Depends who's asking. This is Detective Ramon, Midtown North. You asked about Freddie Link yesterday. I sat up straighter. Yeah? You might want to know. He's dead. OD'd sometime during the night. Needle in the arm. I didn't speak right away. Wolfe, watching me over the edge of his coffee cup, raised one eyebrow. The left, which meant mild curiosity. The right was reserved for outrage. Where? I asked. His apartment. East 84th. No signs of a struggle. No note. Just gone. Thanks, I said, and hung up. I told Wolfe. He grunted and reached for the butter. You think that's coincidence? I asked. Not until you prove otherwise. That makes 2 of us. Something stang a finger in my direction. You've been nosing around, Goodwin. Funeral homes, florist kids, mystery notes. And now that kid's dead. Wolfe sighed, set down his book, and folded his hands. If you're implying Mr. Goodwin's curiosity induced a fatal overdose, I must correct your logic, Inspector. I'm implying he poked something that poked back, Kramer snapped. I shrugged. If I had that much power, I'd charge more. Kramer's scowl deepened. Wolfe's gaze cooled, and for a moment the air held the crackle of an approaching storm. I assume, Wolfe said, that the cause of death was ruled an overdose. Kramer nodded. Needle in the arm. Empty bottle on the floor. Nothing fancy. Wolfe tilted his head. And this boy, Freddie Link, was employed by Miss Camille Yarrow. Yeah, Kramer grunted. Delivery boy. Kid didn't even have a record. Wolfe closed his eyes for a moment. 2 deaths, he said. One a business partner, another a subordinate, both in close orbit to a boutique funeral establishment. Both coinciding with peculiar messages and unexplained gestures. Kramer leaned forward. You saying it's not a coincidence? I am saying, Wolfe replied, that coincidences, especially when garlanded in lilies and soaked in dye, deserve skeptical scrutiny. I glanced at Wolfe. His eyelids were at half-mast, which for him is equal to a bullhorn announcement. Kramer shifted. So what? You're taking the case? No, I am observing the inevitability of involvement. Kramer scowled. Just don't step on my toes, Wolfe. I would never dream of it, Wolfe said. Yours are far too large and far too tender. Kramer's glare could have peeled paint. Later that afternoon, Camille came by, eyes swollen and voice barely above a whisper. I heard, she said, standing in the office doorway like grief itself. Freddie. Wolfe waved her to a chair but didn't rise. That was my department. She sat stiffly. He didn't use drugs. He was scared of aspirin. Said his mother worked in a rehab clinic. He wouldn't even drink soda. Yet, Wolfe said dryly, he is now dead with a hypodermic in his arm. I know how it looks, but he wouldn't. He just wouldn't. I said, people do strange things under pressure. She shook her head. He was loyal. Too loyal. He'd get flustered reading a menu, but he never messed up a delivery. Wolfe grunted. And yet. That was all he said, but it echoed more than any full sentence. Camille sat there, pale, breathing like someone waiting for thunder. Whatever had killed Freddie, needle or not, it hadn't started that night. It had started the moment that orchid showed up. Fritz, in addition to being a culinary wizard with saucepans, had a peculiar side hobby, tinkering with flower dyes. Not for consumption, of course, he'd once explained, but for ceremony. So when I asked him to test the red stain from the white rose that had crash-landed through Camille's front window, he was oddly delighted. By dinner, he had results, and a pair of tweezers wrapped in parchment like he was presenting caviar. Here, he said, handing me a vial with a smirk. That stain wasn't floricultural. It's a textile pigment, synthetic, industrial. Meaning? Meaning someone didn't use dye from a flower shop. They used something meant to stick to fabric, wood, plastic, not petals. Wolfe, who was enjoying squab with sherry sauce, paused. A message, he said. Unnatural, crude, designed to persist. I added, also creepy. Fritz sniffed. It smelled like linseed and vinegar. I tucked the vial in my coat pocket. That's not mourning, that's branding. Wolfe nodded. Precisely. The message wasn't just being sent, it was being stamped in. And we were getting closer to the hand holding the stamp. The next morning, the orchid rooms were quiet. Wolfe didn't emerge for his usual 11 o'clock session. Fritz reported that breakfast had been eaten, but only half, a sure sign of turmoil. For Wolfe, skipping half an omelette was the emotional equivalent of weeping into a pillow. I found him in his chair, frowning at nothing in particular. 2 bodies, I said. One staged like a perfume ad, the other looking like a PSA gone wrong. He didn't respond. So what's the plan? Wait for a third? See it. And I knew then, someone was going to regret ever messing with Nero Wolfe's morning routine. It didn't take long to get someone talking. All it took was coffee, 2 donuts, and a delivery guy from Midtown Flowers with a loose tongue and looser morals. Green, he said. Yeah, Aldous Green. Quiet guy. Slick. Always looking for a shortcut to the top shelf. Was he planning one? The guy nodded like I'd handed him a tip. Sure. Heard he was getting seed money from someone. Planning to open a new outfit. Uptown. Real hush-hush. Not with Camille, though. He was going solo. Any name for the backer? Nope, just rumours. But Aldous was walking around like he had a winning ticket in his wallet. Cocky. Real cocky. Back at the brownstone, I handed Wolfe the info. He gave a non-committal grunt and reached for the beer Fritz had brought in without a tray. That meant things were serious. If Aldous intended to abandon Miss Yarrow professionally, Wolfe said, he may have become disposable before the betrayal became actionable. Nice way of putting killed before he could bolt. Wolfe inclined his head. Precisely. The thing was, Camille had mourned Aldous like a widow. Now it looked like he'd been days away from making her just another name on his cancellation list. If Otto Bellini had ever smiled, It was probably during a tax audit. I dropped by his office under the pretense of asking about wreath delivery timelines. He gave me a look that suggested my tie offended him personally. "I don't do gossip," he said. "I'm not asking for gossip," I said. "I'm asking whether you and Aldous Green were in business together, or in conflict." "Both," he said. "That punk stiffed me on 3 invoices last fall, then started undercutting me on client packages. Real low stuff. Low like funeral sabotage." He snorted. He gave a eulogy arrangement shaped like a dove. Dove looked like a busted turkey. Got the family a refund. That kind of low. "Nice guy." "Snake," Otto said, "with bad taste in flowers." "You ever tell him what you thought?"
"I told Camille," he growled. "Told her to keep him on a leash or I'd sue."
"You follow through?"
"I sent the paperwork." "Never heard back." His eyes narrowed. "Now he's dead. Ain't that something?"
Yeah, I thought. It was. Especially if Otto thought it meant debts didn't need collecting anymore. Mrs. Trina Delaford lived in an Upper East Side brownstone that looked like it had been lifted straight from a PBS drama and polished with gilt. She met me in a parlour that smelled like roses and secrets. Black lace veil, dry smile, and a voice like silk wrapped around a scalpel. "I assume you're here about Mr. Green," she said. "I like how you jump right to the middle." "Men like Mr. Green rarely had beginnings," she replied. "Only endings." "I heard he handled your son's funeral." "He did." "Nice job?" "He was discreet." "Efficient and very expensive." "And afterward?" She stiffened slightly. "There were insinuations." "From him? That my son's death might not remain a private tragedy?" "Overdose?" She looked past me. "Youth. Mistakes. We paid for privacy, Mr. Goodwin." "You mean you paid Aldous to keep the lid on?" "No," she said, "but it was too fast. We settled accounts." "I assumed the matter was closed." "Until?" "I received a reminder. A note, anonymous, asking if I'd like to renew the arrangement. I ignored it. I didn't have to ask if Aldous wrote it, because blackmail doesn't leave receipts, but it always leaves enemies. Donnie Cray ran a flower shop in Hell's Kitchen called the Mourning Vine, and it looked exactly like it sounds. Wilted, cranky, and desperate for sunlight. He came to the counter in a wrinkled apron and a stare that could bleach linen. "You with the Gazette?" he asked. "Nope, private." "Then buzz off." "I'm just here for background," I said, leaning on the counter. "Your name came up alongside Aldous Green's." "Figures, slimy little bastard." "Lose a client to him?" "I lost 3, he growled. "He underbid me at a wake last summer." Agreed without fuss. Wolfe dialed again. "Mr. Cather, Mrs. Delaford. I want to know who visits her and when. Discretion, but thorough." Ori was less cooperative, but finally agreed. When he hung up, Wolfe leaned back and closed his eyes. "If secrets are buried," he said, "they rarely remain so. Especially in soil rich with resentment." I asked, "You think any of them's ripe enough to kill for?" Wolfe opened one eye. "They have motive, means, and opportunity. The only missing element is proof." "Then we dig?" he grunted, deeply, and judging by the look in his eye, he was just getting started with the shoveling. The note came 2 days later, folded in thirds and delivered by hand. No postage, no return address, just an envelope on Camille's desk when she came in. She didn't open it immediately. She thought it was a sympathy card from a client. It wasn't. I was there when she did. Her hands shook as she slid out the paper. 1 sheet, white, typed. 12 words. "You let him talk. You'll be next. Your petals will bleed." She read it twice before her knees gave out. I caught her before she hit the floor. When she came around, I made tea. Wolfe doesn't believe in it, but Fritz stocks it anyway, probably for moments like this. Archie, she whispered, do you think they killed Freddie? I think someone's got a plan, I said, and it includes symbolism, threats, and maybe more flowers than funerals can justify. She nodded slowly. They think I know something. Do you? I don't know, but I suspect. That was enough. In Wolfe's book, suspicions could be fatal, especially when typed, unsigned, and folded into death threats. I brought the note back to the brownstone. Wolfe didn't say a word as I handed it over. He just adjusted his reading glasses and examined it like it might confess if stared at sternly enough. Then he said, "We must accelerate." Why? Because the killer has increased tempo, and I do not care to fall behind. He set the note down and rang for Fritz, which meant the next move wouldn't be a conversation, it would be strategy. The phone rang at 6:42 in the morning, which is against every natural law except the one that governs when corpses decide to turn up. I fumbled the receiver with one hand and knocked over a glass of water with the other. My voice came out like sandpaper on a Monday. Goodwin? Her voice came in jagged. Camille Yarrow, tight and breathless, like someone trying to outrun a nightmare. Archie, it's Bellini. Otto? He's here. He's... She stopped. He's in the cooler. Please come. I sat up straighter. Cooler as in refrigeration or cooler as in dead? Both. She hung up. 5 minutes later, I was out the door in a shirt that didn't match my tie and a mood that didn't match anything at all. By the time I reached Petal and Stem, the front door was locked, but Camille let me in. Her eyes were red and not from mascara. I found him 10 minutes ago, she said. I came in early to prep a wreath. I thought it was Freddie at first. I followed her to the back. Let's just say Freddie wouldn't have fit the dramatic staging. This time, someone had set the whole scene with flair and a sense of theatre. The floral cooler at Petal and Stem was large enough to house a dozen caskets, but this morning it held just one horizontal human. Otto Bellini, reclining like he was waiting for applause. He was sprawled across a crate of hydrangeas, arms splayed, throat cleanly slit. And he wasn't alone. Around him, tucked carefully, were lilacs, fresh, pale, and perfumed. Someone had gone to trouble, the kind that doesn't show up in florist manuals. Camille hovered behind me like she expected Bellini to sit up and hand her an invoice. I squatted down and took a better look. The wound was sharp and neat, no sign of a struggle, which meant whoever did it either knew the place, or Bellini, well enough to get close. Where was the lock key? I asked. She shook her head. Freddie had it. I have mine, but the third's, it's missing. Missing? It was in the back drawer. We haven't seen it.
Throat. Kramer scowled. You trying to be funny, Goodwin? No. If I were, I'd use different material. He looked at Wolfe, who had arrived in the back, looming like a pessimistic Buddha. Tell your boss not to interfere. I didn't bother replying, because Wolfe was already interfering. He just hadn't opened his mouth yet. Wolfe surveyed the scene with a kind of expression usually reserved for overcooked trout. Disgraceful, he said. Kramer spun on him. You got something useful to add? Wolfe didn't blink. Murder should not be staged like operetta. It insults the blood. Excuse me? The lilacs, Wolfe said. No florist would refrigerate them. They wilt under cold. But someone placed them here deliberately, without understanding their fragility. Kramer squinted. So, Wolfe said. You're looking for someone who imitates floral knowledge without possessing it. A counterfeit florist, if you like. Camille's eyes widened. I gave her a nod. Kramer muttered. So now we're profiling murderers by botany. I'm profiling them by ignorance, Wolfe replied, which is far more effective. Kramer stalked off to bark at forensics. Wolfe turned back to me. I want Saul, he said. Already on call, and I want Bellini's phone records. I raised a brow. Expecting a memo from the killer? No, Wolfe said, but I expect the killer left footprints. And if they wipe them? He allowed a small smile. Then we shall follow the scent. Saul Panzer never smiles, but when he says interesting, it usually means someone's about to get arrested. He met me at Rusterman's the next afternoon, over veal ragout, and dropped a folded sheet onto my tablecloth. Bellini's last 5 calls, he said. 2 were business, standard clients. 1 was to his lawyer. But the last 2, well, I unfolded it. Number 4, Donny Cray, our hot-headed florist with a flair for poor decisions. Number 5, an unregistered cell, spoofed. Burner? I asked.
Yep, but I traced the SIM location through a parking meter camera. Leads to a walk-up on 62nd Street. Cash lease. No name. I took a slow bite. Bellini was talking to the enemy. Or getting bought off. I leaned back. Let me guess. That apartment? Saul nodded. Already sent the building super to check the lease. Took a little grease. And? He gave me a look that said, get Wolf Spear ready. Because what came next was going to blow petals off the whole bouquet. The apartment on 62nd was 3 floors up, no elevator, and smelled like disappointment. The landlord, a man who looked like his last happy day involved prohibition, handed me the lease folder. There, in black ink, was the name. Edward L. Green. And underneath, in the space labelled Emergency Contact, a number that traced to Petal and Stem's back office. I called Wolfe from the corner payphone because I didn't want this in my cell log. Wolfe, it's Archie. You sitting down?
Archie?
I am always sitting down. Name on the lease is Green. Silence. Then,
Aldous?
no middle initial, but the handwriting is a match to the Florist ledger, and the phone's connected to Camille's back room line.
Then Aldous Green is not deceased.
Or he was very tidy before he died. Another pause.
You will return at once.
Bring the lease and call Saul. I want surveillance on the building. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe studied the lease like it had insulted his mother.
This changes our framework,
He said. No kidding.
If Aldous Green is alive,
Wolfe continued.
then the message is misdirection.
Camille was his partner in business. But what if he was staging his own death? Not to escape threat, but to eliminate competition. You think Camille was in on it? Wolfe scowled.
No, I think she was collateral.
He tapped the lease with one finger.
And I think we're not chasing a killer.
We're chasing a puppeteer. Outside, the spring sun was shining. Inside, the shadow around Aldous Green just got a little colder. And we were now hunting a man who'd fake there, but only part-time. Like a squirrel renting a second tree. In the closet, I found a duffel bag stuffed with florist aprons, all labelled Delicate Touch Floral Design, not Camille's shop. I jotted the name down, and then spotted the metal filing cabinet shoved against the wall like a guilty conscience. Locked. Saul's spare pick set came in handy again. It clicked open like a bad idea, and that's where things got interesting. The top drawer was pure business. Invoices, delivery slips, tax forms that hadn't seen a CPA in years. But the second drawer sang a darker tune. Trina Delaford's name jumped out like a frog in a top hat. A thick folder, stamped with the kind of precision that suggested Aldous Green had found his true passion in organised extortion. Inside, I found photos. Blurry, grainy, but unmistakable. Her son, Graham Delaford, neck-deep in something white and powdery. A stack of bank transfers from an anonymous LLC in Trina's name, paid monthly to a private account marked AG. And then there was the letter, typed. No return address, no signature. Just a simple note that read, "Trina, this proves what we both know. Graham didn't die clean. Keep your money coming, or I go to the press. You owe me for silence. You owe him for shame." I whistled low. Aldous Green wasn't just a man with bad taste in aliases. He was a blackmailer with a sentimental streak, and it looked like Trina Delaford had paid dearly to keep her family name Lily White. Only now the lilies were blooming in a refrigerated deathbed. And I hadn't even gotten to the nastiest bouquet. Back at the brownstone, I dropped the folder onto Wolfe's desk like a bouquet of rotten roses. He didn't touch it. Wolfe doesn't touch anything that smells of glue and moral decay. But his eyes narrowed. "Explain." So I did. The second apartment, the hidden duffel, the ledger that made the IRS look like amateurs, and Trina's name, wrapped in silence and monthly payments. Wolfe nodded once.
Aldous Green was not an entrepreneur, he said. He was a leech with floristry as camouflage. Silence, I added, was his most profitable product. Wolfe tapped the desk. "And this explains Bellini." "Yeah. If Bellini found out what Aldous was running, he might have threatened to go to Camille. Or worse, take a cut." Wolfe grunted. "And Aldous, unwilling to share, decided to rearrange Bellini's pulse." "Except Aldous is supposed to be dead." "He is not," Wolfe said. "But someone may soon wish him to be." At that moment, Fritz stuck his head in. "Dinner in 20, he announced. "Trout soufflé." Wolfe didn't answer. He was busy staring at the lilac sketch I'd brought him, and plotting something that smelled a lot like finality. "You will sit," Wolfe told me, "and listen." So I did, with a bottle of beer and the scent of trout soufflé floating from the kitchen. The lilacs, Wolfe said, were placed in the cooler not merely for display, but to send a message. A message in flowers? Yes. And the messenger was an imbecile. I took a sip. "You say that like you're insulted." "I am," Wolfe snapped. "Any genuine florist knows lilacs lose their scent when chilled. They collapse, lose shape, and rot from the core. Which means whoever arranged Bellini's corpse wanted theatre, not authenticity." He held up the sketch again. "Note the pattern. Lilacs ringed around the head. That is not funeral custom. That is dramatics, showmanship." "So not Camille?" "No, nor Bellini. But Aldous Green, or someone who thought like him, might very well substitute drama for subtlety." I nodded slowly. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "The arrangement is not only a clue. It is a confession. If I handed you a pair of pruning shears," Wolfe said, "could you replicate a bridal spray?" "Sure," I replied, "if the bride doesn't mind something that looks like it came from a highway rest stop." "Precisely," he said. "You have no true knowledge of floristry, but you've seen enough to imitate it poorly." "Flattered," I said. Mid-chew, made an announcement. "I have invited guests," he said. I glanced up. "Tonight?" "Yes. Anyone still breathing?" "Some." I put down my fork. "Mind sharing who gets to join this elegant inquisition? Miss Camille Yarrow, Mr. Donny Cray, Mrs. Trina Delaford." I raised a brow. "That's 3. Wolfe dabbed his lips. "And Aldous Green." I blinked. "He's alive." "I am aware," Wolfe said, "though I doubt he'll enjoy proving it." "How do you manage that?" "Saul is fetching him." Mr. Green checked into the Danton Hotel under the name Marcus Elgin, paid in cash, with a habit of tipping poorly. "Saul tracked him."
Saul suggested that if Mr. Green declined our invitation, I would leak his bank ledger to the IRS. I grinned. Effective. Wolfe stood. We will convene in the office. Set chairs for all, except Aldous. No chair. Wolfe's eyes gleamed. A man who fakes his death forfeits the right to sit comfortably in my house. I headed to the office. Outside, the doorbell rang. 6 footsteps entered the house, though I was pretty sure only 5 of them were welcome. And one of them had a lot of explaining to do. There's a particular tension that settles over Wolfe's office when you fill it with suspects and tell them dessert depends on murder. Camille Yarrow sat on the edge of her chair like it had teeth. Donny Cray wore his nervousness in his cuticles, fingers twitching, eyes darting. Trina Delaford was cool, composed, the practiced chill of a woman who's hosted too many charity luncheons with rivals she'd rather drown. And Aldous Green, yes, the undead himself, slouched like a man who hadn't gotten enough sleep in his own coffin. Inspector Kramer stood by the bookshelves, arms folded, eyes narrowed, the human version of a cement truck daring you to jaywalk. Wolfe was, of course, in his throne behind the desk, yellow silk robe, scowl of disdain, and the kind of expression that made you feel like a clerical error. "I appreciate your presence," he said, "though some of you, I confess, are less welcome than others." I took a seat by the globe and opened my notebook. This wasn't a party. It was the reading of a metaphorical will, and Wolfe was about to declare who'd been written out. Wolfe lifted the pot like it held nuclear secrets. "This," he said, "is Dendrobium green flame. The hybrid orchid registered only once, through a Dutch grower catering to collectors of vulgar ambition." Camille blinked. Aldous frowned. Kramer grunted. "Green flame," Wolfe repeated. "Ordered 6 months ago by a mister. A green. Shipped not to the flower shop, but to a postbox registered under a shell company. The same company used to collect monthly payments from Mrs. Delaford." He set the pot down. "It bloomed 2 days ago. Orchids, as you know, are persnickety about light, warmth, and timing. This one required daily tending." Kramer scratched his chin. "So?" "So," Wolfe said crisply, "it proves Mr. Green has not been dead. He has been gardening." Aldous opened his mouth, then closed it. I added a note. "Orchid outs zombie." Wolfe leaned back. "Murderers lie. Orchids do not. They merely grow and reveal." Next up, who planted the last lie in Bellini's grave? Wolfe turned to Camille. "Miss Yarrow, you assisted Mr. Green in what you believed was a harmless errand, acquiring lilies, storing them in the cooler, leaving the back door unlatched." Her lips trembled. "He said he needed to store a special delivery for a funeral." "Yes," Wolfe said. "His own." That got a blink from Kramer and a gasp from Trina. Aldous shifted in his seat like he'd been caught shoplifting in a church. "He staged his death with your help," Wolfe continued, "without telling you. Because he needed Bellini dead and himself vanished." Camille covered her mouth. "The scene was theatrical," Wolfe said. "The lilacs chilled to ruin, the petals placed in defiance of botanical sense. It was meant to suggest obsession, a crime of passion." "Which would lead to Camille," I added, "which you were betting on." Aldous opened his mouth. "You paid Bellini off for years," Wolfe said, "but he got greedy. Or careless. Either way, your elegant solution was murder, then martyrdom." Camille someone with partial knowledge would place lilacs in a cooler and think it poetic. Wolfe's gaze narrowed. "It was you who finished the tableau when Aldous faltered. You stepped in, to frame Camille, and maybe bury Aldous along with Bellini." Donny looked like a bouquet left too long in the sun, but Wolfe wasn't done pruning. He had one more stem to snap, and it came in leather. Wolfe rang the bell. Fritz entered with a silver tray and the solemnity of a coronation. On it sat a plastic evidence bag. Inside, a pair of gardening gloves, the cheap kind that turn your fingers into sausages. Found, Wolfe said, in Mr. Cray's trash. Delivered by Mr. Panzer. Kramer stepped forward. What am I looking at? Gloves stained, Wolfe said, with 2 substances. 1. A common florist dye used to tint petals unnaturally blue. 2. Dried blood. Type B positive. Bellini's. Kramer whistled through his teeth. Donnie stood, face blank. I threw them out before Bellini died. Unlikely, Wolfe said, unless you've also invented time travel. The room went silent. Then Wolfe added, furthermore, the gloves carry microscopic residues from refrigerated lilacs, suggesting they were handled post-chilling, not pre. Donnie swallowed hard. You can't prove. I have, Wolfe said, and the proof wears gloves. Kramer stepped forward. Cray, you're coming with me. Donnie didn't move. Camille looked at him like someone who'd just realized her houseplants were plotting a coup, and I had a feeling the real drama hadn't quite hit the final bloom. Kramer pulled out the cuffs with all the ceremony of a butcher grabbing twine. Donnie Cray, you're under arrest for the murder of Lorenzo Bellini. Donnie didn't resist. He just stared at Camille, who looked like she'd been dropped from a 3-story bouquet. I didn't mean, he said. I thought Aldous was dead. Camille's eyes went glassy. So you killed for me? Donnie shrugged, helpless. He hurt you? No, she whispered. He used me. And then she sat down, fast, like a flower folding under frost, hands shaking, mascara sliding, composure wilting. Fritz appeared silently with a damp cloth. Trina offered a hand, surprisingly gentle. Wolfe, for his part, merely observed. Kramer clicked the cuffs and gave me a look. You'll type it up. Already have, I said. He grunted and led Donnie out. Camille sobbed once, then stood, trembling. May I go? Wolfe nodded. If you wish. She left with the grace of someone trying to remember how to walk. Aldous followed, silent. Only Trina lingered. You enjoy this, don't you? Wolfe folded his hands. I enjoy truth. She left without another word. Wolfe sighed. Archie. Yeah? Beer. I fetched 2. The case was closed, the suspects wilted, and the orchids blooming. But somehow, it still smelled faintly of guilt. And next morning, I had a feeling Wolfe would want to dissect that too. 1 petal at a time. Wolfe had settled into his chair like it owed him rent. The last of the suspects had been dismissed, the door bolted by my hand, and the room held the rare silence of post-mortem justice. I sat, notebook open but pen idle, ready for what I knew was coming. Wolfe's victory aria, usually in the key of indignation. There is, he began, swirling his brandy as though it had insulted him, a curious symmetry between botanical deception and human perfidy. Both require concealment, mimicry, and a willing eye to be fooled. I nodded. And both end up dead when trimmed too close. He ignored me. The Phalaenopsis hybrid left on Bellini's chest was no accident. Its origin could only have been known to one who had access to the donor orchid, one Aldous Green, a man who faked his own death, played puppeteer with grief, and fancied himself clever. I thought of Otto in the cooler, of Freddie in the alley, of Camille shaking like a wind chime in a gale. Plants do not lie, Mr. Goodwin. They grow or they wither. But men, he sighed, placed his glass on the tray with the weight of philosophy. Men concoct truth the way florists dye carnations. He closed his eyes. For effect. And I didn't clap. Camille didn't linger. She stood in the hallway, clipped down 35th Street, another woman who learned too late that in Nero Wolfe's orbit, truth blooms and everything else wilts. Back in the office, Wolfe examined the check Camille had tried to leave like it was a bug on his steak tartare. "I presume," he said, his thumb barely touching the corner, "this is intended as payment for our services." I leaned on the desk. She called it gratitude. I'd say it was an apology with numbers. Ha! He dropped the check into the wastebasket as though it were contagious. "I accepted this case, Mr. Goodwin, to uphold an intellectual affront, not to profit from a woman misled by emotional debris." I lit a cigar. "And the $400 worth of time, cabs, and Saul's late-night alley crawling." "An investment," he declared. "In justice." I puffed. "With a negative return. I shall adjust the menu accordingly." It was his version of a joke. I let it hang in the air like overwatered hyacinth. Wolfe might not take dirty money, but he sure didn't mind moral high ground, even if the footing was expensive. Dinner had been trout soufflé, 2 types of wine, and Fritz's signature rhubarb tart, a dish Wolfe deemed adequate, which in Fritz's world was grounds for culinary self-flagellation. Afterward, we retreated to the office. Brandy for him, cigar for me. He sipped. I reclined. "Remind me," I said, "what part of that circus act required me to dig through compost, 2 bank statements, and a closet full of someone else's grief?" He glanced over his glass. "Your tasks were not merely instrumental, they were essential." I expected resistance. "You performed acceptably." "That's touching. I'll get a certificate framed." He ignored that. Again. We sat in companionable silence, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock and the unspoken thought that maybe, just maybe, this one hadn't ended as clean as we liked. Wolfe leaned back. "Sometimes the bouquet is not worth the thorns." I raised my glass. "And sometimes the thorns come with teeth." He didn't disagree. He just reached for the bottle again. The office was never truly quiet. Even at its stillest, it buzzed with things unsaid. Tonight, the buzz came with names. 2, to be exact. Freddie Delaford, dead in an alley with a secret he didn't know he was keeping. Otto Bellini, chilled like Thanksgiving leftovers, the poetry of his death bleeding into the lilacs. "They weren't saints," I said aloud, mostly to myself. "No," Wolfe said, without looking up from the orchid journal. "Merely victims. Of fear, of greed, of poor associations." "I've seen cleaner hits," I muttered, "even when the motive was cash." "Because this," Wolfe said, "was not murder for profit. It was murder for preservation." "Of what?" He looked at me. "Image." I didn't answer. He wasn't wrong. Aldous Green had gone to the mat to stay dead, and Donny Cray had taken the bait, like a florist with a thing for Gothic theatre. I glanced toward the door, half expecting Freddie's ghost to knock. Instead, I poured another glass of brandy and waited for the guilt to evaporate. It didn't. The next morning, I found myself staring at a pair of white gloves. They'd been left on the desk, crisp, spotless, the kind you wear to funerals if you want the grief to match the outfit. Wolfe hadn't touched them. Fritz swore they weren't his. And me? I don't wear gloves unless it's winter, or I'm helping bury someone's dirty secret. "They're Camille's," Wolfe said, not looking up from his paper. "She wore them when she arrived. She did not wear them when she left. She left them on purpose, flowers that betrayed them. It was the silence between petals, the chill in the cooler, the hand that reached for beauty to mask a wound. Camille walked free, but not untouched. Donnie's rage curdled into regret, and somewhere between Freddie's unplayed notes and Otto's final breath, the truth settled like fallen pollen. Unseen, but lasting. Would you have turned her away, as Wolfe did? Or accepted the cost of a kindness paid in ruin? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed the mystery, be sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves detective stories, and subscribe for more. Not every case ends with applause, but the truth, once found, always echoes.